Great. Well, thank you everyone for being here this afternoon, for battling a really busy parking garage. And I always feel at this moment like I'm conjuring the airline folks who say, you have many choices how to spend your flying dollars. Thank you for flying with us today. So truly, thank you for being here today to celebrate and hear from the 2024 Charlotte Street Visual Artist Award recipients and to celebrate their exhibitions. Of course, I want to acknowledge the funders and supporters who helped make this possible. Funding generously provided by Paul DeBruce and Linda Woodsmall DeBruce, Muriel McBrien Kaufman Family Foundation, Sarah and Bill Morgan, Nancy and Rick Green, Stephen and Marianne McDowell, Hallmark Cards Incorporated, Hush Blackwell, and the Alan and Judy Kozloff Fund. And the importance of Charlotte Street to Kansas City's art ecosystem cannot be overstated. We're so appreciative of the impactful work that they do to center local artists in the community, and as well for their invitation to the Nelson-Atkins to host the 2024 Charlotte Street Visual Artists Awards exhibition for the first time. Many of you know, it's been since 1997 that the Charlotte Street Visual Artists Awards have celebrated the outstanding achievements of local contemporary artists. Each year, there's a jury of arts professionals from across the country who come together to select the awardees. And I was honored this year to join the senior editor of Hyperallergic, Hakeem Bishara, Walker Art Center Assistant Curator Taylor Jasper, and the curator from the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth, Maria Elena Ortiz, to select this year's recipients. It was about a year ago, just after Thanksgiving, that we all in our individual places in Minneapolis and in Fort Worth and New York and here in Kansas City were working away on our computers, sifting through more than 100 applicants from artists from the 5-county metro area. So we worked through our individual rankings and then came together over Zoom to determine how to narrow down those more than 100 applicants to 10 studio visits that we would make together in February. We failed at that. We needed to make 11 studio visits, so there were 11 of those 117 artists that we felt compelled to learn more about and to visit in person. And after 2 days of studio visits and meals and deliberation and debate, we came together and chose the 3 awardees you see here, Aaliyah, Kevin, and Juan Diego. The incredible work by these 3 artists that you'll see in the galleries really helps us to better understand our collective history, both distant and very recent, as well as where we stand today. It encourages us to have empathy for a range of experiences, and the more time I spend in their exhibitions, I believe it really does have the capacity to equip us to navigate the future with more open eyes, minds, and hearts. So it's been a great honor to work with all 3 of the artists to help them realize their individual exhibitions. And of course, it's a great honor of mine to welcome them to the stage today. So please join me in welcoming the first artist from whom we will hear, Aaliyah Washington.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aaliyah Washington, and I'm originally from Dallas, Texas. My art is predominantly made from fabric, but I do consider myself a mixed media artist. Today, I'm going to talk about the thought process of making this body of work and how I learned about where we inhabit brings me closer to a place. The core values in my work are resourcefulness and community. The concepts focus on uncovering history and a city layout. As a kid, my favorite part of driving in video games were the maps because the exploration felt limitless. Now I have my phone GPS, and as an adult, I still learn about a place in a similar manner. Main missions of where I am and why I'm there, side tasks of trying to find new food, other quests of figuring out what to do for fun. These ideas of space and place and here in Kansas City have similar patterns that reminded me of the city I grew up in. This is because the US government made red line maps, which were used as the foundation to expand the city, and this city and many others. In quilting, I use proximity of materials in a condensed area to play off the idea that people help build community. Ironically, red line maps were created to keep people racially separated, and they are still affecting us today. I didn't let that stop me from learning about and loving somewhere new. I decided the gallery walls needed to be orange because whenever I'm exploring a new city, my favorite time of day is to go during a sunset or sunrise. I wanted that time frame to be consistent and a consistent theme and vibrant feeling throughout the show. In this body of work, I have drawings included to further expand on the layout of a city and even place a Johnson County segregation map onto a Dallas County map to show how they align so easily. Most of my ideas of learning about historical maps began as drawings that explore line work and texture. This helps me decide how I want to use color to evoke feelings and establishes how I want to use space and have hidden meanings. Abstraction, topographical maps, and race-based power systems are all represented through my monochromatic color schemes. I use symbolism instead of always recreating the maps. Each individual texture, pattern, material is personified as an individual person in a community, which further expands on the idea that we're stronger together. I cut down larger pieces of fabric that are mostly found in domestic spaces and collaged them with a maximalistic way. One of my favorite elements to highlight in a place is its body of water. I find it interesting that we depend on it for survival, but we also pollute it. Being near it brings me peace, but ironically, flood and hurricane season in Texas are a recurring worry for me. So I made a quilt that is larger than a person to study the steady movement of water. Perfect. I take inspiration from traditional quilts and apply a modern twist to it. Snake Trail was a deep dive in the migration of water while focusing on the idea of pathways and the power of choice. My process is heavily centered around repetition and upcycling fabric while shining a light on the craft of sewing. I make my work to be viewed from a distance, but the viewer gets close and they can discover details for themselves, like the direction change in my stitches, and later how I have to individually hand sew back into the pieces, which is the chaotic part, but I still love it. I want to encourage you to spend time with the art. Thank you. And next, I'd like to welcome Juan Diego to the stage.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Juan Diego Gaucin Carrillo. I teach over at Haskell and Johnson County Community College. I got my MFA at KU. My current body of work focuses on immigration and draws on my own personal experiences as an immigrant. So here's a little bit of information about myself. I was born in a rural area of Mexico between the state of Durango to the north and the state of Zacatecas to the south. My dad, when he was young, he went back and forth from the U.S. and areas of Mexico, working seasonally as a farm worker and odd jobs like a cook. After a few years, he got his residency and moved our family to the United States, where we flew into Chicago. So my first experience of crossing the border was by plane. It was during this period of going back and forth before gaining residency that I experienced crossing the border illegally several times. Those experiences are what led me to pursue this body of work specifically. My graduate studies at KU are where I really began to focus on the US-Mexico border and its surrounding themes. I've always had an interest in oil painting with the figure as a focus. Experimenting with various techniques led to the deconstruction of visual language and the reoccurring approach of figurative abstraction. I started where a lot of artists are encouraged to begin, working from observation. One of the most striking memories from crossing the border was the many crosses on fences and missing posters seen in the border towns. So I decided to work with that as a subject matter, using a single light source for dramatic shadows, a mannequin, some cloth, and I began to paint the bodies. Specifically, the bodies of people murdered, alluding to the femicides happening along the border and in Mexico as a whole. Various methods of applying paint and pattern were explored. This specific pattern I really became attached to and can be seen in some of the works in the gallery. The bodies began to resemble topography or landscapes from aerial views, and that kind of got me started thinking about the desert and the landscape of the border. So one of the problems in the border was people disappearing and being buried, and there would be groups that the only way they would recover the remains of their loved ones is by getting like pieces of rebar and combing the desert, stabbing it into the ground, looking for loose pockets of dirt where there was like freshly buried people. So this painting reflects that. And thinking about all the crime and drug violence on the border led me to explore kidnappings and disappearances. But after a while, I decided to soften my tone because this seemed like a very dark subject matter and potentially focusing on the wrong aspects. So reflecting on what I think the community needs to see versus parroting what is on the news media and how I could counteract the negativity led me to focus more on the individual experiences of the migrants. So after some time, I decided to broaden my scope. And as an artistic practice, I've always relied on drawing, specifically value-focused charcoal drawings, as a supplement to my painting practice. And so here are some images of drawings that I use to explore pattern making and themes, compositions. I've always been drawn to the stark, dramatic quality that's created through charcoal, particularly working with value and subtractive methods. So at this point in history, immigration in the news was starting to become a bigger talking point. The movement of people and the impact it had on the communities was being weaponized. And it was towards the end of graduate school when child separation and mass detention programs really started to hit the news. So I decided to focus on that and to try to counteract some of the vitriol and the demonization. Border guards and police apprehensions, Customs and Border Protection, they show up quite a bit in my work. So I constantly thought, reflecting on my childhood, like, what would it have been like if I would have been one of those individuals that was detained or separated or placed in a cage? And this kind of motivated me to work from a place of empathy and compassion. And I think as an artist, that's a great place to be making work from, as the work, I feel, flows much easier when you're doing it for like the community or for a group or for a purpose. I had to carefully consider how pointed I wanted my tone to be and to what degree I wanted to provoke the viewer. There's still that side of me that is somewhat edgy and really wants to like be political, but I've been trying to rein that in. So this one is from the Caravans. And so that leads me into my thesis work, where I began to focus on large-scale painting, showing scenes of human suffering owing to family separation, detention, and general abuses. This is the Edgar Heap of Birds Gallery at KU. Abstraction of faces, bodies, and environments is one of the main vehicles I use to both protect individual identities while kind of highlighting their internal emotional state. It's important for there to be a visual similarity to what's seen in the newspapers. So I work a lot from clippings, photography, and other kind of news media images, hopefully with the goal to resensitize the viewer that's been desensitized by like the barrage of negative news. Consistent elements of deformation and ambiguation of the human form communicate the personal experience of the subject. So lots of scenes. So these are all real people and real scenes. And I think that's really important for the work to be connected to something that actually happened to actual people and not just be a representation of those things. The direction of the work is also meant to act as a recording of historical events, one that captures the human element in a unique manner to that of photography. Through the combination of key visual elements, images can be both specific and ambiguous, personal and universal. You know, it really is a goal of mine for everybody to be able to connect to the work without having to have had those specific experiences themselves. And I think immigration is something that's fairly universal to everybody. The movement of people continues to be an issue and will always continue to be an issue as long as things are changing. And I particularly like abstraction as it can harness the duality of perception to create complex narratives. And I enjoy that every composition could be its own challenge, an opportunity to find information that's hiding beneath the surface, to bring out that contrast between external experience and internal experience. Hopefully you enjoy the show. Thank you. And next, I'd like to welcome Kevin up to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming this afternoon. It's really an honor to see so many people out here, and also to see so many people from my KCAI community. My name is Kevin Dimery. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, but I found my home here. I'm a proud faculty member of the Kansas City Art Institute in the Foundation Department. Today, what I'm going to talk to you about is a couple of different series of works that I feel like transformed my practice, and I want to focus in on this wind chime series. So before I give you more context to that, I just want to tell you that there was a moment in my practice where I was in a huge artistic slump. I didn't know what I wanted to make. And so my lovely partner, who's in the audience here, Kayla Stenstrom, she told me to dig back into the archives of the work that you made and find a piece that you would like to reignite or bring back to life. And so I always intended to just make one wind chime. And then because of her advice, I ended up making quite a few. So I'll tell you the stories about that. So these wind chimes are the silhouette of the youngest person to be executed in the United States. His name was George Stinney Jr. He was 14 years old. He was falsely accused of murder. And then he was electrocuted in Alkaloo, South Carolina, 1944. So I took the image of his mugshot post-arrest and I turned that into a large bust that I attached to wind chimes. I was at a residency called the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts back in like 2018. And I remember I used to take walks a lot while I would, be thinking about the work I wanted to make. I had this mugshot in my mind, and then I started hearing things like a bus as it was releasing that kind of hydraulics. I heard birds chirping, and I would hear all the different sounds around me. And I thought about sounds that you didn't have to see the object or the thing that's making that sound in order to know what it is. And when I heard a wind chime, I thought about that autonomous instrument was a powerful metaphor for the things that we run from in life in a way that you know what it is, but you don't have to see it. Same that you could do with racial prejudice. And so I want you to hear this wind chime just because the ones in the gallery are a bit soft. If we have sound. We may not. There we go. This is a bit soft as well, but the thing is that I really thought it was powerful to think about the idea of that celebration in death, right? So there's this piece is called Seance of the Unarmed, and it's really talking about in a lot of ways how the body itself becomes like this symphony. And I didn't want a tragedy, particularly this tragedy of this young African-American child, to be the defining moment of that life. And in a lot of ways, a lot of the work I make thinks about how we can reframe tragedy so that the victims don't have to hold that tragedy as their defining element. So these are two different works that I really am very proud of. To the left here, this piece, Snap, Crackle, Pop, was a piece I made about 2 years ago, but it really signifies a lot of the ways I think about making artwork. So it's talking about the progression of state-sanctioned violence going from slavery to police brutality to police killings. And in a lot of ways, I think because I was very much a student that was in love with pop art when I was in art school, I believe that the ability for an image to permeate the mind means that it has to be quite graphic. And so, to the right here, I have another example of the wind chime series. This piece is called Like Dust, I'll Rise. And it is referencing cowrie shells and how they were used during the transatlantic slave trade to count bodies. And a lot of the work in and of itself is about how objects can kind of take over as a metaphor for bodies. So this piece here, From the Earth We Came to the Earth We Shall Return, which I got to show at the Charlotte Street Foundation before I became a resident and an awardee, really signified that. So these bottles here, these are blue bottles, and they come from the Southern tradition of blue bottle trees. And if you've ever seen them in the South, it actually came from the transatlantic slave trade, where enslaved Africans would use blue glass to kind of capture evil spirits like talismans. And so this is kind of a melange or an abstraction thinking about this Christian body housing this kind of Africanity in a way. And in a lot of ways, I always think that collage, particularly abstract painting was my origin. I was a painting student. And so even when I sculpt, I see it like that, in a way that I'm bringing together these various different elements to bring about new meanings. And I won't talk too much about that just because I want to get into this work. This is a work that I'm really, really proud of in a lot of ways. This piece is called Gone with the Wind. And this is a series that I had been making for quite some time when I came to Kansas City. I haven't been showing it, but it is a series of church fans with different historical figures. So I'm going to go down the list of the historical figures so you can kind of get a sense of just the histories I'm igniting. But to the left here, this is Hattie McDaniel, the first Black woman to win an Oscar. She wasn't allowed to go to her ceremony to get that Oscar because it was segregated. Then you have Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a famed civil rights activist, particularly in Mississippi. I love the contrast between the faces, right? So I think that's a really powerful moment. Then you have James Baldwin, who was a famed author, also civil rights activist, and then John F. Kennedy, president during the time in which the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was starting to get cultivated, though he, of course, would pass away in 63. And then you have John Lewis, who was able to not only be a civil rights activist himself, but lived until the Black Lives Matter movement. So I love the fact that these lives overlapped. And I'm always constantly thinking about that particular time, Jim Crow civil rights, because my mother would tell me a lot of stories about living through it. And I always think about how time, several different people are connected through time, just for the sheer fact that their lives overlapped. And so that was kind of the impetus behind that. And then the vehicle is that they are on these church fans, which is a custom in African-American Christian traditions. But again, you know, in doing the work that I do, I think about it as it's all really rooted in talking about the various different African-American histories that circle around our subjugation, our calls for freedom, and our ability to really persevere through some really unimaginable human tragedies. In that way, I think about the Wind Chime series as being a good example of that, because it's an autonomous instrument. When it kind of decides when it's going to speak in a way. And so I love that for that reason. I'm going to skip over this video, but, oh, now the sound works. Okay, so never mind. Then I won't skip over the video. Yeah, I really, really like this one. You can kind of see how they move. That was the first time. Oh, you know, Hung, you're in the photo. Anyways, I'm just saying hello to some friend who's in the audience. Yeah, this was the first time I showed it at the Kansas City Art Institute. I was really excited about it. But also, just kind of as I'm about to round out the talk, I have a few more images I'll show you all. Again, I think, and I was just talking about this with my mother the other day, because there's a piece I made for her in the show. If you've been able to see the show, is an anagram puzzle, and I'll talk about these puzzles in a minute. But it says, you know, integration and gentrification. There's these two words that are connected, because I think I circle around the civil rights movement quite a bit, because when I was young, as a small child, my mother would tell me all these stories about seeing these historical figures and, you know, experiencing what it was like to see the world change so much. And I think I'm circling back to those moments a lot, because it feels like the world is changing in just as rapid of a pace as the way that she described in her youth. So these two pieces were referencing that. This is, of course, Ruby Bridges, a silhouette of a young girl who was brought in by the FBI to integrate schools. Okay, perfect. And also this piece to the right is kind of referencing that, this idea of upward movement or mobility. I got two more slides for you all. So I'm just going to briefly talk about this anagram series that is very prominent in the exhibition that we have here at the Nelson. So I was in my studio in 2020 in Berkeley, California, and I was doing this project where I was making children's puzzles. I really resonated with what Juan said and what Aaliyah said about going back to childhood and thinking about how that can be the impetus for where we start to make as artists. So I got really interested in doing baby name puzzles with these kind of socio-political you know, interjections into them. Never with the goal of making an anagram, but when I had one in my studio that said lynched, and that was going to be the piece. It just said lynched, like a baby name puzzle. But then I pulled the word deny out of it, and it really ignited this series. So this piece, education, pulled the word caution out of it. And then in this last slide, I'll show here the word marginalized and pulling the word dream out of it. I think for me, making these anagrams is about saying that there's always hidden meaning, even behind these kind of larger cultural themes, that, you know, the same way as I said with the Wind Chime series, that individual is not just a victim, they're a whole life, a whole universe that's been taken off the planet, right? So I think language is a way for me to be able to investigate those kind of things, that it doesn't just mean when you're a marginalized body, that's not where the story ends, right? So yeah, I'm sure I'll have a lot more to tell you all about that when we round up together, but for now, that's what I got. So thank you.
Lots of food for thought. So as you are thinking about what you just heard, I'll ask the 3 Charlotte Street Visual Artist awardees some more questions, but then please think about what you may like to ask them as well. So we'll talk here for about 20 minutes, and then about 3 o'clock, we'll turn on the house lights, and it'll be your turn to engage the artists in some conversation. So every time that I have the opportunity to talk with you, whether casually or in this more formal setting, I'm just learning so much, and I'm so appreciative of all that you have been so generous and so vulnerable to share individually and in front of this whole audience. But I was wondering, as far as learning, as you were preparing for your 3 exhibitions, what did you learn about yourself and your practice? You can go second the next time.
I'll go second next time. You know, it was that we were given the opportunity to title the exhibition, and it's funny, I really struggle with titles. Sometimes they come to me, but sometimes they don't. And so I think what I learned about myself was that, memories can be so embedded in you, and that artwork in a way can help to unearth those things. The title of my exhibition, A Lesson Before Dying, was really about that when I was 7 years old, my uncle, who's an artist, I saw a piece of his that had this in it, and it was a collage of a lot of different Black men, and it had such a profound impact upon me. I find out later that that's the title of a book by a person named Ernest J. Gaines, and it was about the execution of a young man named Willie Francis, and he died 2 years after George Stinney Jr. in the same way. So there's this interesting kind of moment where I said, wow, before I even knew the core, the story that would ignite that artwork, that this kind of was in there, it's in the milieu. So I just think the ability to unearth elements of yourself through the work.
I titled my show Slowly Drifting because various reasons. The process of sewing and looking for fabric, I feel like I always have to seep into a mindless process, especially when I'm dealing with repetition. Some of the processes get very tedious, so instead of getting overwhelmed with hyper focusing on one thing, I just have to just remind myself that I'm transitioning into emotion, and even slowly drifting into, memories, or the memories slowly changing into something different. I just feel like my process of making is a form of meditation. And I think it's okay to just be with it. If you know me, I love rabbit holes and tangents. So it's like we can slowly drift where we're supposed to be heading, or we can go right field or left field and keep going on. And it's just a really fun process for me.
So I think what I learned from this past, 8 months or something like that, was that I'm at my best when I'm in the studio working long hours, and that I need a tremendous amount of time with the work to really connect with it. And it also made me realize what the priorities are in my work. And that's to focus on something outside of myself, to be thinking about others, and trying to do work that does some good for the community or some good for maybe even the world as a whole. And something that like responds to what's going on in our society. So something very current and contemporary. Because whenever I find that I work in my own self-interests, the work takes on a very different tone. And I'm really impressed at how work that is for the sake of others or for like a more altruistic cause tends to develop a life of its own.
That's really interesting. Segues into something else that I've been thinking a lot about, and you've also touched on that already today, how each of you in your exhibitions has at different moments focused on an individual or an individual moment, whether it's George Stinney Jr. or with Haitian migrant incident from 2021, or Leah with the Illinois mother, Sonia Massey, when she was fatally shot by a sheriff's deputy in her own home just July 6th of this year. So thinking about these people, these moments, thinking about what you were sharing, Juan Diego, about doing something for community, for others outside yourself, this role of artist educator or artists who shine a light. Could you all talk a little bit more about that and how that motivates your practice, how you bring these stories, these people, these events into your studio, part one. And part two, what formal choices do you make to ensure that these individuals in these moments do take on a larger life? Kevin, I was really moved by what you were sharing about not wanting to have anyone's identity be solely wrapped up in tragedy and how there could be so much more. So I really feel like in each of your works, there are elements that focus on the individual and the specific, but then you can really apply that to much bigger things over much greater time periods. So what do you think about that?
So I think one of the things that I kind of following along the tangent from before was a responsibility to a certain direction of work. And in order for the work, I think, to shine, it also has to be authentic. So there is a need to pull from the self, even though it is kind of outwardly focused. And I think that's as much of a technical thing as it is like a conceptual thing, at least for me, because I think people respond to that authenticity whenever it is something where you're drawing from personal experiences, or your personal experiences can add color to the work itself.
This is fun. I came across sewing and quilting over quarantine, and I was transitioning from a junior into my senior year, and everything went virtual. So we were just learning everything from home, and I wanted to learn more before I was just sent off into the world. So for 2 years and until now, I was making a lot of artwork within the home space. And just even being an undergrad, having that debate of fine art versus craft art was always in my mind. And I really love being able to elevate quilting because it's such a tedious task, and it also brings people together because you end up sharing it. And I hang a lot of my quilts like paintings. And going back to the piece that you mentioned about Sonia Massey, it just moved me because, you know, I'm always making work in a domestic space and talking about how it's a safety net, but to learn about someone in their home space and someone enters it, even though you don't want them to, and it ended her life. It just makes me think of those silver linings and parallels that I have within my work. And like Kevin said, not defining that person by their death only, especially if it wasn't, their fault. And just creating a beautiful moment to highlight their life just allows you to just smile and appreciate them for even being here.
Could you talk about some of the other signs and symbols that you incorporated into that piece?
Yeah. That work was also a collaboration with a local painter and multimedia artist, Cooper Williams. And, you know, there's various Egyptian symbolism. You know, a lot of women in ancient times were honored with their titles and were seen as leaders. And just to be able to highlight her as if she was someone as powerful as Nefertiti was really exciting. And, you know, having glitter and sequin, giving the glitz and glam as if she's a big movie star in Hollywood was really exciting too. And definitely layering paintings and, you know, different symbols like that within the piece, but still having the focus just be around her face, that you can't avoid this piece until you look at her, was really important.
And Kevin, when you're thinking about that silhouette of George Stinney Jr., I've read and heard you talk about how it really does become a stand-in for others, and thinking about his last formal portrait, that mugshot, how does that become tied to racial profiling? How do you think about that work as far as being, again, an individual but speaking to so much more?
Yeah. You know, I had somebody ask me this the other day when I was working at the school, and it kind of, like, as I said to you all, it unearthed another memory that I hadn't thought about in years. It was around 2020 again. And this work had already been made, or, you know, the seeds of it had been sown, but I hadn't begun to remake these wind chimes. But George Floyd had just passed away. And I remember that I was, you know, online teaching. I would call Kayla and be like, okay, I'm coming home, because, you know, Oakland, this is where I'm from, Oakland, California, it would be crawling with police. And oftentimes I would be stopped by the police. And, you know, I've had experiences where I've been profiled and in danger as a result of that. And I remember writing on my desk, I didn't write it literally on the desk, but I wrote it on a piece of paper, "I will be missed." And it was thinking about this idea of universes. Human beings are, in my opinion, universes. There are so much that unless you know someone personally, you can't attribute to the impact and the different ways in which they're woven through so many different parts of our society. And so when I saw that mugshot for the first time, seeing the sorrow in this young person's eyes, but also thinking about there's so much to this individual I'll never know, irregardless of how much I study them, right? And in a way, I said, that's the collective right there, to black out that individual and think about how often that a headstone doesn't do us justice, right? Really, I think the real headstone is when you meet the people who miss those individuals. And so I remember thinking that I would say, like, remember, no matter what takes place when I step outside of this door, just going about 3 or 4, miles back home, but hoping I can make it home. Remembering that I am a universe. I would say that to myself, and it would be kind of the thing that kept me going, right? And so I try to give that to the work whenever I'm conjuring up someone else's image, right? Like, how can I give them so much more that I think if you can stop and look at the wind chime even just a little bit longer than maybe you would a photo, then I feel like I've done something.
So I think we've started to touch on some of the conversations that are sparked between your 3 exhibitions. If you've had a chance to visit the show, you'll see it's 3 shows under one gallery roof. But Charlotte May, the amazing exhibition designer, another shout out to KCAI, a graduate, she was really brilliant in her exhibition design by allowing for some porosity between the 3 shows and between the 3 experiences. And I think you're also seeing that on screen here, how you can see Aaliyah's work and Juan Diego's work, and then you'll have a peek at Kevin's. So I know you've had a lot of time to spend in the exhibition, and we talked about this a few weeks ago, but what are some of the other conversations that you see being sparked between the 3 of your shows now that they're all together under one roof?
So one thing that stands out to me about all 3 works is accessibility and universal qualities. I think that's an area in which the 3 are working really well together, because people can walk in and not necessarily have the same experiences, but be able to access the information that's stored in the work. And I think that's very important for us artists to be able to connect to that common level that everyone can meet at, but still discuss these kind of difficult and more complex issues in a way that's like digestible and impactful, that'll leave like a lasting impression on people so that they can reflect, ruminate, and who knows, maybe even like change something in their community or in their daily lives.
You want to stare down. When I mostly speak with people that recently viewed the show, one thing that constantly comes up is these are current topics, and they have been topics that have been cycling around on social media, and it's nice that it's actually in person that we're having these conversations. And I think we're sometimes mixing up the routine of walking through a museum and just moving to the next gallery. Yesterday when we were there, hearing people speak about their experiences and, having various emotions and actually sitting with those emotions and really sparking conversations within the space has been really exciting.
I feel like the connectivity for me is that, with a lot of exhibitions, I believe artwork talks to each other, right? And I can't shake the feeling every time I go into the exhibition that it feels like when we 3 have conversations. And, we had studios next to each other at Charlotte Street at one point. And me and Aaliyah knew each other a little bit longer than that even. And I think about when I walk into the room with Aaliyah's and it's orange, I feel like it's bright. Like your energy, the way when I'm speaking to you, I feel like I see the honesty in the way you speak, Juan, right? And I always feel like the history, the part of my love for history, and like seeing how when we 3 talk, that I feel like the work speaks to each other in that way. So I think what I love the most about it is it's like you feel the 3 people. So I feel like, I can forget that you're not there when I walk into the exhibition and I'm sitting with the work,
That's really lovely. Yeah.
That's nice.
So you mentioned all 3 of theirs were Charlotte Street Fellows together, having studios in close proximity before you can move to different studio spaces. So you did get to know each other and have these conversations, and your work is still having conversations in the gallery. But when you stepped into the exhibition for the first time, to let all of you know, they installed at separate periods. So Kevin installed his show first, then Juan Diego, you came in next, and then Aaliyah, you were at the tail end. So they weren't in the gallery all together. So you had this moment where you come in and you see the 3 shows together. Was there anything that surprised you about the work or the feeling or content that was just unexpected based on what you knew about each other?
The first thing I noticed was that there was like some unintentional or maybe unconscious like harmony of color between all the shows. The oranges contrasted nicely with a lot of the purples, and like the shadows and the deep black in a lot of the work. It just kind of worked together really great. Like the lighting seemed, even though they were individually lit, it all seemed like it was part of like a cohesive show, like one unit. And so to me, that says that we were probably operating on similar wavelengths, in the studio practice. I don't know.
I wanted to stare down this time. Well, I had the luxury of being the last one to install, and I was too excited because I saw both of your works, and I was like, wow, this is going to be awesome. And just seeing some of your paintings unfinished in the studio and actually seeing them done and seeing what route you went to finish them was like so mesmerizing. And I had the luxury of seeing various wind chimes before, and to see them next to each other in a line, and the way we all worked with the installation team, I was just really proud. I was like, this is gonna be awesome. I'm still too excited.
Yeah, I mean, I think immediately it's just, I came in after the show was open because I was first. And I think, like I said, I was really taken aback that I was like, oh, I'm feeling these two artists more than I just immediately thought I would have to digest what I'm seeing. Now, that's the luxury of knowing them. So I think that it would be different for any of you who maybe have a different experience there. But I just felt like, oh, I know these people, and this represents what I know about them. But I guess in terms of surprise, it's just how things were oriented, what decisions you all made, because we didn't know that. We didn't know at all how each other would lay out the space. So yeah, it was just exciting.
Well, I want to be sure that we have time for all of you to ask any of your questions, but one last question for the three of you. Clearly, you are well on your way. You are there, and you're going to be even way beyond there. So could you let us know a little bit about what's next? Where should we go to see your work? What do you have cooking? What do we need to put like good vibes out in the universe for you because you've applied for something amazing? What's next for all of you?
I think for me, hopefully more shows in the Kansas City area, continuing the same body of work, but also exploring some other bodies of work that maybe aren't so heavy, like folklore, maybe even something humorous and whimsical. Residencies, I would really like to get out, see the rest of the country. Charlotte Street has kind of shown me how wonderful networking is with other arts organizations and other artists in general. So like the more I could get out to the rest of the country and just learn more, meet more people, broaden my horizons, that would be amazing. And continued teaching for me, because I've enjoyed teaching. And to continue doing that, would be a blessing. So wish me luck on that.
Because I want me to break this. I had the benefit of during this show, like making this show, I did a show at Art Cologne. So that was really exciting. So similar works. But I want to shamelessly plug that a former Charlotte Street Visual Artist Award fellow, Andrew McIlvain, and I are going to be doing a show at Leedy Volkes Art Center. That'll be in June in the big room if you know the space, but if not, come on out. And yeah, we've been collaborating quite a bit, and I think that's the best part about the Kansas City area to me, that it's such a generous arts community. So I hope that I can see you there.
And I'm in the works for 2 different shows that will be locally here in Kansas City. I'm still getting the details, so stand by. And they will be in March and April as well.
So, yep, Tim's got the house lights coming on up, and my great colleague Bernadette will be running the mic. So, are there any questions for Aaliyah, Juan Diego, and Kevin?
You all know each other. What have you learned from each other, and what would you like to make together?
Well, I've learned that these two professors are so caring for their students that, I just admire that all the time. And what would we make together? I don't know. Like, that's a question for you guys. I don't know yet.
Well, the first thing would have to be a plan and figure out what we can collaborate on. But I think that would be fertile ground since there's so much overlap and we have such diverse skill sets. I think we could easily come up with something. I wouldn't be surprised if it was community-centered and maybe had some involvement from students.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think for me, it's joy and the power of honesty. That's what I've learned from these two, which is that like Aaliyah reminds me about joy. Like every time I have a conversation with Aaliyah, I walk away happy. You know what I mean? And then every time I talk to Juan, I always think about like, I can be unabashedly true to myself, right? And I'm very conscious of trying to think about what I can get in terms of like what other people's energy can teach me, right? So I hope if we were to make something that it could, I'd love to know what you all would think I could bring to the table. And so that's rhetorical, but whatever you need,
I did tell the artist yesterday that if all of you didn't have questions, I would ask them if they had any questions for you. So if you don't want to be put on the spot, please go ahead and ask a question. Otherwise, they may turn it around and ask a question of the audience if they've got a burning question for anyone there about experiencing the exhibitions or anything at all.
Ooh, I got a question. What did you guys think about seeing local artists right next to all these established artists in the museum?
Juan, I may be wrong, but I couldn't find your name on your paintings, or I couldn't. You didn't put them on your.
Yeah, I don't really believe in signing paintings. I know like a lot of painters do that, but I don't know. I was just never really. I feel like it takes away from the painting. It distracts the eye.
Okay,
But,
thank you.
I mean-
I wanted to hear what you had to say. Any more?
No, just that. I guess that's like a technical or formal consideration more than anything.
I have one question for Kevin and one for Leah. Kevin, the lighting in your wind chime series is so dramatic. And so I'm wondering how that came about. I was surprised when I saw the slides with your talk that the other pieces weren't lit that dramatically.
Yeah, when we were crafting the exhibition, I would be, in the studio till really late at night. And some of the books I had been looking at are of cathedrals. I was looking at a lot of images from the Vatican during the time I was making this work. I think about martyrdom a lot in the work that I make, particularly Christian traditions of martyrdom. And I was thinking a lot about that kind of chiaroscuro, that really dramatic lighting that you see in, Renaissance painting. So it really inspired it. And one night I just kind of had one of the little studio lights and just put it on the ground and saw the way it emanated light upward. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So it's kind of the seeds of it and where it came from.
So you did the lighting yourself, or the idea for the lighting.
Yeah, I think it was a collaboration, but yeah, the idea to light it from the ground, and then me and Charlotte and Stephanie and all of us, we worked out creating a barrier for how we would hide that lighting. But yeah,
No, it's dramatic. I can't think of a better word. And the question for Leah, my heart goes out to you with your final years as an undergraduate spent alone by necessity. And in this, as you say, very tedious process of all the stitching that you have to do with the kind of quilting that you did. And another artist who does her work in quilting is Bisa Butler. So I wonder if she has had any influence on you.
Yeah, she, especially when I was a sophomore, was very inspirational to me. When I was thinking about creating art and highlighting the everyday life, in many scenarios, I was the only student of color in class, so critiques sometimes got a bit difficult because it was focused on how putting a Black body as the main forefront of an image was always political versus what I was trying to do, like Bisa Butler, highlighting the everyday life. So it led me to want to explore abstraction because I could, as a safety net, guide the conversation in a manner that I wanted to instead of always being in the spotlight. It really felt like this most days in class. And it was a bit exhausting. So it led me to focus on details that I really wanted to explore more. And really, you know, I worked in the wood shop at KCAI when I was a student for most of my undergrad as a work study job. So really learning about turning the wood grain and going against the grain and just learning about something that is a living thing and how you cater to it in its death still affects the way that it functions as an object or so on and so such. But playing with fabric, especially like suedes or different yarns and stuff, I would treat them like woodworking, sewing against the grain, creating drastic lighting with stitching and stuff. And that's why it was so exciting for this show, because I stepped out of my comfort zone and collaborated with an artist and started putting figures back into my work other than just focusing only on abstraction. And, you know, being in art school, you learn the history of the building, where it was made in the 1800s, or you learn about traditional art practices. And it was always discomforting knowing that those spaces were never made for minority people, and especially it wasn't made for women. So I always love bringing in those images of like quilts and highlighting them like paintings and having stuff to glorify the delicate touch that you bring to a fabric, and just exploring topics like us being in a place that has a long history. And in that way, I feel like when I'm creating these maps with fabric, I'm honoring the people that were there before me.
Thank you.
When she asked you, how did you feel seeing your work displayed on the museum walls, I think you guys sold yourself short. I love the museum, spend time in it, but I suspect 75% of the items on the wall, at least for me, failed to make the jump between looking at the piece of art and the emotions it's developed. Every one of you has made that crossing. Painting after painting after painting. You can't look at your stuff and say, oh, well, you know, nice piece of art, you know, maybe we can turn it into a scarf. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question for Juan. Hola, Juan. Siempre es un gusto ver gente de México aquí en el museo. So I have a question for you. Are you interested in the future of doing or portraying the immigrants' contributions to this country? You know?
Yes, and that kind of goes back to one of the things I was talking about in my slides is focusing more on the positive aspects and less on like the hardship. And I think that kind of goes along with what you guys were talking about, like not defining somebody by the hardships and the difficulties or their deaths, and instead defining them by, you know, their life and the positive aspects. So that's definitely subject matter that I would love to explore. Oh, and that reminds me that I might actually have some work to show at the Mexican consulate here in the future. So that would be like a perfect place to explore those contributions to society and like the benefit. So thank you for that question.
This question is for Kevin. In your wind chimes, your found items, how do you accumulate those?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of times it's about the spirit of an object just as much as it is about where I'm sourcing it from. So in the case of the piece I showed you all at the beginning of the artist talk, the Seance of the Unarmed, I went searching for tambourines in particular. So it's kind of like the same way I did the church fans, and that's kind of iconographic in terms of Black Christian tradition. The tambourine is as well, but I really felt through those tambourines, trying to see, does this have that same feeling that I remember? You know, in terms of the skin on it, or how is it worn, right? For me, I think that objects really hold a lot of essence of the human beings that activated them. And so in that same sense, I think more so the same way that you can see the texture of paint and you feel something from that. I believe that the worn object has that as well. But in terms of like even the work in the exhibition, like I took some of those cherubs from the Sistine Chapel and then had those vectorized and cut out. So it's always this kind of, like I said, abstraction or melange of different items that are really making me kind of think about these kind of martyrdom, death, but also celebration, life. So it's kind of how I get at it.
We probably have time for one more question if there is one. Oh, someone in front. Okay. Down the front.
I think you all made new work for the exhibition, is that right? So it's an opportunity to sort of incorporate recent work or make new work. So I'm wondering, you know, what the opportunity presented to you to either try something new or different or expand on your practice.
So me personally, as soon as I found out that the work was going to be at the museum, and when the thrill of like having Juan wore off, then kind of the responsibility and the reality set in. And it was like, oh crap, this is like a really like big opportunity. I shouldn't, you know, think too lightly of it. So yeah, it definitely was a chance to show, you know, work ethic and to like try as hard as I could and to see how far I could push myself in the studio and to really produce something that makes use of the opportunity, because, you know, these kind of opportunities don't come by often. And it's thanks to a whole lot of like stars aligning that these things happened. So like that definitely, I don't think was lost on us, that it was a special opportunity. So it required special effort. And in my case, yes, it's all new work. I think probably for you guys as well, right?
Yeah.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I think I always tell when I'm working with students, I believe that when you're creating new work, it's an opportunity, right? There's a power in the ability to conjure up something new, but it takes time and energy. And so it was definitely a lot of work, but it was a wonderful challenge. But I think for me, in terms of the making of the new set of work, it was about surveying what were those ideas about in the first place. So the thing that my partner re-instilled in me was the power of recreating something. Because before the year 2020, I would do just a new work every time. Totally new idea, totally new materials. It was just kind of a thing I did. And I don't even know where I began to have that tendency. But post 2020, I really started to think about what it meant to revisit ideas and to make something in a series truly. And that's how I saw this collection. What did it mean to go back? Why am I making these giant mobiles of this individual? Why am I making these puzzles? Why am I doing these castings? And that was a wonderful exercise.
Some of the larger pieces like Snake Trail I've made for my senior thesis. And those were parts of the story that I wanted to tell for Slowly Drifting. So I felt it was important to include those. And then I always either sketch or keep my drawings completely separate from all of my fabric work. In my slideshow presentation, you saw stuff like a drawing of blue bonnets, and I always do a lot of finished drawings of flowers for my grandmothers and never show the final drawings of other stuff in shows. So I really wanted to play around with recreating the skyline to, you know, show my love for Dallas still, because you could take the girl out of Texas, but you can't take the Texas out the girl. Anyway, but still, I had various work that was mostly new, and then a few works that were already made to that I wanted to add to. And I think we had one more question up front. I saw your hand first. Did you still want to ask it?
So the question, yeah. My question is do you have dealers that represent you, number one? Number two, do you have the desire to go to the big stage and go to New York possibly and find yourself? And thirdly, the contemporary art market, from my perspective, has diminished in the last few years. It seems like there's such an abundance of work, and I think this all has to do with the internet. I mean, I personally get hundreds of emails every day with offerings from different artists around the world. And there's almost so much to look at, you don't know what to look at. I mean, because there's only so many hours in the day. So the question is are you concerned about the market for your work? Because this is how you're going to earn your living. And I would be concerned because of what's going on. I do think the market will come back. It's funny that when I see the market from my perspective, people are flocking to young, emerging artists like yourselves, and some of the very established, proven artists in this world are falling by the wayside, and it's shocking to me.
Yeah, thank you. I'm personally not represented by any dealers or galleries. I do work with a couple of different art collectors here in Kansas City that have reached out to me, but I definitely feel like I don't worry about the future of will the art provide for me and will it live on its own. I think especially as a young up-and-coming artist and, you know, as working artists as we are, if you focus on that too much, you're not going to sleep at night. And sometimes making art, you don't sleep at night anyway. And like, even a part of this show, I got a travel grant, and I just got back from Paris, and just seeing Art Basel and just still being mesmerized by art, I think is important. And having that desire to want to be a part of various shows like that. You know, in undergrad, I always worked at least 3 work-study jobs. And, you know, as a working artist now, I work 2 year-round. So I think we're not a stranger to work, you know, as artists. But I think it's important to see what is popular or what is hitting the scene and everyone is looking at it. When I started deep diving into fabric art, it wasn't passed down. Quilting and sewing really wasn't passed down in my family. I was just experimenting with stuff, and I'm the type of person to make it, and then my professors are like, oh, why did you do it in that order? And I'm like, because it felt right. And then I have to remake it and be like, okay, now I see why you asked those questions, but that's still the fun part about the art. So are you guys represented by anyone?
Yeah, the wonderful gentleman sitting right behind you, Miller Bogart, from Bogart Gallery. He's representing me. Thanks, Miller. As far as the art market, I think that being focused, this is my personal opinion, so take that for what you will. Being focused on money is not a sustainable art practice, because then you're focused on the bottom line and not the art itself, or why you're making the art, how you're making the art, and all that sort of thing. So I feel like, for me personally, it becomes more of a distraction from my art practice to think too much about money, selling, and all that sort of thing. I personally prefer to just focus on my work, and I'm completely content never selling a painting, hanging them on my walls, or giving them to family. Like, that's good enough for me. And I feel like I tell my students that should be like where your head should be, because then it's really focusing on the art and why you're making it, and also focusing on yourself. So it seems more healthy that way than some kind of like marketing or financial strategy. I'm also a teacher, so like I have that income as the way that I plan, as opposed to like some financial strategy for selling artwork. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the question. So I have a non-exclusive contract in Germany with a smaller gallery. Very fortunate to be with them. Oftentimes when I'm talking to students about this, I believe in diversifying what markets you're in. So I was very happy to see that we just sold a work in Germany recently. But I think to your question, remember there were 3 parts. So wanting to be on the big stage. Yes, I love to say that, because I tell the students, be hungry, you know, want to go as far as you can take this work, right? That's my belief. But then on the other side of it, I do believe in that I got into this work, making this work with a burning desire to create social commentary. So I refer back whenever I'm having any hard times to some of the origins of graffiti. So if some of you don't know about that, with the bird lives. So you're talking about Charlie Parker, right? And that some of his friends were going around and writing bird lives on everything. And one of my early professors, a man named Raymond Saunders, who was a painter in San Francisco, I remember going into the SF MoMA and seeing one of his paintings for the first time, and it said "Bird Lives" on it. And I used to write all over my studios when I was in undergrad, "Art lives," right? This idea that it's autonomous, that it really is something that will ebb and flow just like nature. So I have no doubt that we'll be able to have fertile ground over the course of our lives in terms of the art market. But I think it's about the commitment to the work and staying the course. So I'm totally set to do that. If it takes till I'm 65, 70, I'll do it. So that's my answer.
Well, thank you for thanking our artists with that round of applause. And now we would love to continue the conversation out in Block Lobby with some desserts and coffee. Again, thank you to everyone who showed up today. And the exhibitions are open through August 10th. So if you will visit again and again, tell your friends, and remember that these folks are local. You can reach out, ask them questions, support them. We're just really fortunate that they are here in Kansas City. So thanks all of you for being you.
Thank you.